Good day. My name is Dr. Antonio Okana. I am a physician, and I am the founder of Epiphany 360. In the time we have together, I want to walk you through a proposal for a national learning system for behavioral readiness, what we call Continuous Behavioral Intelligence, or CBI, and then show you the working software that already puts that idea into practice today. Here is the frame for this discussion with Dr. Nick Carlton and the CIPSRT group. You have already built the national foundation. 550 new PSP.NET clients in 2024 to 25. 14 agencies embedding PSP.NET into workplace practice. 98% average user satisfaction. Research, treatment, training, and knowledge mobilization all under one roof. The opportunity in front of us is to make those assets learn together. Across programs, across sectors, across provinces, and critically, across time. Today, there are strong individual programs, the RCMP and Public Safety Personnel longitudinal studies, PSP.NET digital therapy, peer on-call, and the crisis line research. Tomorrow, one learning system, shared longitudinal definitions, comparable outcomes across settings, narratives linked to change, governed analytics and AI, and evidence returned to every program that contributed to it. CBI is the missing behavioral information layer, and it has three parts. Knowledge-guided acquisition, capturing the same core dimensions at meaningful intervals while preserving each study's validated instruments. Longitudinal encoding, linking person, time, exposure, function, risk, narrative, action, and outcome into analyzable episodes, and governed adaptive learning, generating hypotheses under human review. Note what CBI is not. It is not a diagnosis. It is not an autonomous treatment engine. It is not passive surveillance, and it is not a substitute for prospective validation. This matters for trust. CBI preserves what CIPSRT already owns. CIPSRT retains its validated instruments, its study protocols, its cohort and sector definitions, its clinical oversight, data custody, consent, and research governance. CBI adds the grammar of time, ordering, repetition, and timestamps, item-level provenance, person-to-time linkage across episodes, and a set of common derived longitudinal endpoints. Before we go further, I want to place CBI precisely against the standards that already govern this field, because this is not an alternative to them. It is the layer they have been missing. The National Institute of Mental Health now expects common data elements on essentially all human subjects' mental health research submitted from April 2025, instruments selected through the Phoenix consensus process. CBI does not compete with any of that. CBI is the carrier. It takes those required elements and gives them time, provenance, and lineage. And the deeper alignment is with research domain criteria. The founding argument of our dossier is that a single diagnostic label does not carve nature at the joints, and that we should measure dimensions of functioning instead. CBI is that same instinct, extended. Impairment, as captured by WHO DAS, maps onto our function domain. The one thing our dossier still lacks in practice is a disciplined time axis, repeated comparable measurement of the same dimensions in the same person. That is precisely the gap CBI fills. Same constructs, now with a trajectory. Let me place this inside the argument we are now making in the literature. Mental health does not have an artificial intelligence problem, it has a data problem. The intellectual path is explicit. RDUC broadened what we observe beyond diagnostic categories. NIH common data elements standardized the vocabulary. Learning health systems ask that care itself generate knowledge. And MEDS, the medical event data standard published in NEJMAI, gives us a portable container for longitudinal medical events. CBI addresses the upstream question. Those efforts leave open. What should we ask? And in what sequence? 13 trans-diagnostic domains at baseline, 12 repeated measures of positive function, 6 measures of deterioration, and patient-rated change, anchored to work, home, relationships, mood, self-care, and substance use. The architecture is iterative and versioned. An unexplained outcome exposes a measurement gap. The gap produces a better question, and the better question produces higher resolution data for the patients who come next. Governance of the AI is published, not implied. The platform declares which model produced an insight, which version, and on which inputs, and it states plainly that no component generates an autonomous treatment recommendation. Every insight is decision support for a licensed clinician. Clinician override is one click away, and the override is itself audit logged. Now, security. I want to frame this the way we frame it for police services, because public safety is the hardest room to sell a mental health system into, and for entirely rational reasons. The question an officer asks is not, is my data encrypted? The question is, can this be used against me? So the architecture answers 3 different people. For the user, identifying information lives in a separate isolated store and is never joined into the clinical dataset. The record is decoupled from internal affairs, from human resources, and from the employee assistance file. It is not an employment record. For the provider, role-based access, clinician override on every AI output, and a full audit trail. For the administrator, cumulative de-identified aggregates only, suppressed entirely below 40 people. A commissioner cannot reconstruct an individual, which means a commissioner cannot be compelled to produce one. That is minimized subpoena exposure by design, not by policy. Let me show you what that looks like in the working software. Step 1 is the E360 screen, a guided conversation in plain language across 13 trans-diagnostic domains. The person rates lifetime burden and current severity for each domain, out loud or on screen, and the system records the narrative alongside the number. And this is the output, a symptom profile, domain by domain, showing lifetime burden against current severity, with a cohort average bar for context. No paragraph of text a person has to decode. The shape of the bar chart is the message. Step 2 is the E360 baseline, and this is where the model gets its power. The baseline measures positive metrics, function, sleep, work, relationships, and quality of life, and negative metrics, mood variability, and behavioral variability. The toggle you see here switches between recovery and risk. Higher recovery scores indicate better function. Let me be specific about the metrics themselves, because the specificity is the point. There are 12 positive metrics, the recovery indicators: mood, motivation, productivity, sleep, physical energy, satisfaction with life, social drive, self-esteem, peace of mind, feeling accepted as opposed to rejected, feeling open, the capacity to be vulnerable as opposed to guarded, and resilience, how well a person bounces back when things go badly. Higher is better on all 12, and together they composite into the current assessment of function, scored 0 to 100. Notice what that list is not. It is not a symptom checklist. Every item is a description of a life working or not working. And there are 6 negative metrics: the risk indicators, distress, how stressed out a person feels, mood instability, how up and down the mood has been, agitation, how irritable a person is on the inside where others cannot see it, substance struggle, how hard it is not to use, and that includes coffee and nicotine, not only the dramatic substances, compulsive habits, shopping, gaming, gambling, and social media, and aggression, anger, and short temper that others can perceive. Those 6 composite into mood and behavioral variability. Lower is better. At 6.5 or above, the treatment gate opens, and MBV is reassessed at every single visit until it comes down. And this is the picture that matters most. This is MBV coming down, 8.7 at baseline, a person whose internal state is highly unstable, 7.9 at 2 months, 7.0 at 4 months, 6.4 at 6 months, crossing back below the gate threshold, 5.5 at 12. That is not a feeling that things are better. That is a measured, repeated, auditable reduction in risk in one identified person over 1 year. Multiply that curve across a service, and you have, for the first time, a readiness metric a chief can actually manage against. And because every change is time-stamped, the same record shows what was done and what followed. Treatment impact, time to remission, and patient-rated improvement, all in one longitudinal view, and all return to the clinician as decision support rather than as a verdict. Let me show you where those patient-rated numbers actually come from, because the method matters more than the arithmetic. These questions come from narrative analysis of thousands of fields containing the verbatim answer to one disciplined line of inquiry. First, since your last visit, are you better, worse, or the same? And then, what is better or worse? Second, compared to no treatment, are you better, worse, or the same? And once a trajectory is established, what is different with treatment, at work, at home, and interpersonally? And how has that affected your mood, your self-care, and your substance use? To put that on a scale that allows broader comparison between treatment combinations, the last question is, compared to no treatment, from 0 to 100%, how much have you improved overall? The order matters. The first question pair illuminates the trajectory between visits, which might refer to nothing more than a recent change in medication dosage. The second deconstructs the benefit of the current sum of treatments, the synthesis of talk therapy, medication, and prescribed lifestyle or mind-body interventions. That these micro-narratives are collected at defined points matters too. Undifferentiated free text, such as the answer to "How are you doing?" is far less valuable. A narrative describing improvement is linked to a specific change in function, and an explanation for deterioration is linked to measurable metrics that came from patients, not from researchers. The structured measure tells us what moved and by how much. The narrative tells us why. Now, the timing and the money. DND and the Canadian Armed Forces have said they intend to be a secure, agile, AI-enabled organization by 2030. Canada's defense industrial strategy is built on an $81.8 billion reinvestment and names artificial intelligence as a national strength. Compute is not the bottleneck in behavioral health. Longitudinal, interpretable, governed data is the bottleneck. That is the gap CBI fills. And this is the slide I would ask you to sit with longest, because it is where a very large amount of public money can be wasted. The accuracy of AI diagnostics in psychiatric disease across the various population datasets that exist today has shown promising but highly variable results. The efficacy of AI for psychiatric diagnosis is contingent on the quality and the extent of the data used and on the individual psychiatric condition being modeled. Now consider what most of those datasets contain. 3 or 4 diagnoses: depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, perhaps a sleep measure. They ignore substance use, aggression, sexual assault, compulsive behaviors, eating disorders, and chronic pain. Those are precisely the reasons public safety people go off work, and they drive the costs an organization carries when things go wrong. So the risk is not that AI fails. The risk is that non-experts spend an enormous budget training models on narrow data and produce a confident system that cannot see the conditions that actually take a first responder off the road. Fix the measurement layer first. That is the cheapest decision in this entire program. Let me make that concrete. Substance use is off-duty coping after repeated critical calls, and it shows up first as absence and impaired performance long before anyone writes a diagnosis. Aggression and irritability arrive as complaints, use of force reviews, and legal exposure. Sexual assault and harassment arrive as investigations, settlements, and the loss of experienced personnel. And chronic pain, injury layered on untreated distress, becomes the most expensive class of claim an organization carries. None of this is captured by a 3 or 4 diagnosis dataset. The model never sees the cost driver. One example, end to end. A paramedic, 11 years in service. Sleep collapses after a pediatric call. Alcohol use rises. Irritability follows him home and back onto shift. A narrow dataset records one thing: a depression score within range. No flag. CBI records substance use, aggression, sleep, pain, and function, measured monthly. On the narrow path, 6 months later, you get a grievance, a claim, and the permanent loss of an experienced medic. On the measured path, the rise is visible at week 6, and the organization intervenes while he is still at work. Same person, same year. The only difference is whether the data could see it. One last thought, and it is a serious one rather than a flourish. The design constraints here are sustained exposure, isolation, irregular sleep, a high consequence of error, and a strong disincentive to disclose distress to the people who decide whether you keep working. Any population under those constraints needs this: military and defense, corrections, dispatch, and long-duration spaceflight, where crew behavioral health is a mission-critical, low sample size, high-consequence problem. Same 8 domains, same provenance, same longitudinal grammar, a different exposure profile. Behind all of this sits 45,000 micro-narratives across more than 25,000 encounters and over 100 patients followed for 10 years or more. It is naturalistic and not yet prospectively validated. Its value is depth. So the hypothesis is simple. Does an AI model, given longitudinally structured behavioral data, find clinically useful relationships better than the same model given conventional records? That is the experiment we would like to run with you. Together, that is a national data spine for behavioral readiness. Thank you. My name is Dr. Antonio O'Connor, and this is Epiphany 360. I would welcome the chance